On a busy highway, where cars were speeding by, a small German Shepherd puppy found itself in deadly danger. It stood in the middle of the road, not knowing what to do. At that moment, a man noticed the trouble and didn't drive past. He suddenly stopped, despite the risk, and rushed to save the little one. What happened next, you won't believe it. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any new stories. The highway buzzed with relentless energy, a symphony of roaring engines and blaring horns. Cars zipped past in both directions, their tires skimming the asphalt at dangerous speeds. Amid this chaos, an unusual sight caught the eye of a few startled drivers: a tiny German Shepherd puppy, trembling in the middle of the road. The puppy looked impossibly small against the endless stretch of gray pavement. Its fur was dusty, its ears perked up in confusion, and its eyes darted in every direction as if searching for something familiar. It had no sense of where it was or how it got there. To the puppy, the towering vehicles seemed like unpredictable, roaring beasts closing in from every side. Each time a car or truck whooshed past, the gust of air sent the puppy stumbling slightly, its legs struggling to maintain balance. A horn blared close by, startling it further, and it instinctively crouched lower to the ground, hoping to make itself invisible. But here, on this merciless stretch of road, invisibility wasn't possible. The danger was everywhere, and every passing moment felt like a countdown. Drivers who noticed the small figure reacted differently. Some swerved sharply, narrowly avoiding the helpless creature, their adrenaline surging at the close call. Others barely noticed, too focused on their own destinations to register the life teetering on the brink of tragedy. But the puppy was too young to comprehend the peril it faced. It simply froze, overwhelmed by the chaos surrounding it. The sun blazed overhead, the heat radiating off the asphalt in waves. The puppy's tiny chest heaved as it panted heavily, fear mixing with exhaustion. It looked one way, then the other, its head turning frantically as it searched for a way out. There was none. The edges of the road blurred into endless traffic, and beyond that, the towering metal rails of the median offered no escape. It was trapped, stranded in a world that moved too fast and cared too little. For a moment, the puppy lifted one paw, hesitating as if to make a dash across the road. But another car thundered past, its shadow looming over the tiny animal, and the puppy shrank back again, paralyzed by fear. It whimpered softly, a sound lost in the cacophony of engines and tires screeching on the hot road. Time seemed to stretch unbearably long. Each second felt like an eternity, every heartbeat a gamble with fate. The puppy didn't know it yet, but this was a moment that would decide everything: whether its life would end in tragedy or if some miracle might intervene. The mid-afternoon sun glinted off the windshield of a blue sedan as it sped down the highway, its driver navigating the relentless flow of traffic. The man, in his mid-30s, was on his way to a routine appointment. His hands gripped the steering wheel with practiced ease, his mind wandering to the tasks of the day ahead. The monotony of the road was broken only by the occasional blare of a horn or the flash of headlights in the rearview mirror. Then he saw it. At first, it was nothing more than a shadowy blur on the horizon, indistinct against the shimmering heat waves rising from the asphalt. But as he drew closer, the shape sharpened into something unmistakably alive. A puppy, small, vulnerable, impossibly out of place, stood trembling in the middle of the highway. The man's stomach tightened. His first instinct was disbelief. What was it doing there? Surely it would move. Animals had an innate sense of survival, didn't they? But as seconds passed, it became clear that the puppy wasn't moving. It stood frozen, trapped by fear and confusion as cars whipped by, each one a fresh wave of danger. His foot eased off the gas as his mind raced. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard, his appointment creeping closer with every passing minute. Around him, the tide of vehicles surged forward, indifferent to the fragile life in their midst. He hesitated. Stopping here, on a highway this busy, was reckless. It wasn't just the puppy's life at stake, it was his own. A single wrong move could lead to disaster. But something deeper stirred within him, a pull he couldn't ignore. His eyes locked on the tiny figure, its small frame trembling with each passing car. He imagined the terror it must be feeling, the confusion of finding itself in such a hostile world. No one else was stopping. No one else seemed to care. His heartbeat quickened as he weighed his options. The logical part of him screamed to keep going, it wasn't his responsibility, and stopping now was dangerous. But logic had no place in moments like this. The longer he stared at the puppy, the stronger the pull became, a voice in his heart urging him to act. Time slowed, the decision stretching out before him like a precipice. One wrong move, and it could all end in disaster for him, for the puppy, for the drivers behind him. But as the puppy glanced toward his car, its small, pleading eyes catching the light for just a moment, the man knew there was no turning back. He exhaled sharply, his grip tightening on the wheel. This was it. This was the moment that would change everything. Without another thought, he flipped on his hazard lights and veered toward the shoulder, his pulse pounding in his ears. He wasn't sure what he would do next, only that he had to try. The blue sedan jerked to the right, tires screeching slightly as the man swerved toward the shoulder. His heart hammered in his chest, the weight of the decision pressing down on him like a physical force. Adrenaline surged through his veins as he glanced in his rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of headlights bearing down on him. A truck blasted its horn in protest, the sound echoing in his ears as he maneuvered his car to a halt just a few yards away from the trembling puppy. His mind was a whirlwind of calculations and second guesses. The traffic was relentless, a river of steel and speed that offered no mercy. He knew the danger he was putting himself in leaving his car on the shoulder of a highway, stepping into the chaos, but the alternative was unthinkable. That puppy wouldn't survive another minute if he didn't act. The man's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly for a moment as he sat motionless, the hazard lights of his car blinking in a steady, urgent rhythm. His breath came in shallow bursts. Is this the right move? What if I can't reach it in time? What if? He stopped himself. There wasn't time for what ifs. He had already made his choice. He opened the door and stepped out, the roar of the highway slamming into him like a wave. The rush of air from passing vehicles tugged at his clothes, and the acrid smell of asphalt and exhaust filled his lungs. He squinted against the glaring sunlight, his eyes locking on the small figure just ahead. The puppy hadn't moved, its tiny frame crouched low to the ground, its head darting in every direction. Stay there, little one, he muttered under his breath, though he knew the puppy couldn't hear him over the cacophony of the highway. Every instinct screamed at him to hurry, but he forced himself to move carefully. One wrong move could spook the puppy, sending it darting into the path of an oncoming car. The man raised one hand slightly, a gesture of reassurance meant more for himself than the frightened animal. Step by step, he edged closer to the center of the road, the vibrations of speeding cars rumbling through the soles of his shoes. He could feel the eyes of drivers passing by, some likely cursing his presence, others too preoccupied to notice. Another horn blared, sharp and jarring, as a car veered slightly to avoid his parked vehicle. The man flinched but kept moving, his focus narrowing to the small creature in front of him. He was close now, close enough to see the puppy's wide, panicked eyes and the way its tiny body shivered with each passing gust. For a split second, the man froze, the weight of the risk he was taking crashing down on him. But then the puppy whimpered, a soft, almost imperceptible sound that somehow pierced through the chaos. That was all it took. He pushed aside his fear and took another step forward, his hand reaching out toward the trembling animal. The highway pulsed with unrelenting energy, a cacophony of roaring engines and flashing headlights. Cars flew by in a relentless stream, each one a blur of motion and noise. None of the drivers seemed to notice the man stepping out of his car, his figure dwarfed by the enormity of the road and the speed of the vehicles around him. The man paused for a brief second after shutting the car door behind him, taking in the scene. The puppy was just ahead, barely 10 yards away, but every inch of the distance between them felt like a battlefield. His heart pounded as he calculated his next move. The world around him felt too fast, too loud, and far too dangerous. He glanced at the oncoming traffic, the rush of cars making his pulse quicken. Drivers were focused on their own paths, their own priorities, oblivious to the tiny life quivering in their midst. A few swerved slightly as they spotted the puppy too late, their tires skimming perilously close to the small, helpless body. The man clenched his fists. There was no time to wait, no time to hope someone else would act. Taking a deep breath, he moved forward. Each step felt like a gamble, a calculated risk against the relentless flow of traffic. The gusts of air from passing vehicles whipped around him, tugging at his clothes and making him stagger slightly. His eyes never left the puppy, which remained crouched low to the ground, frozen in terror. The puppy's small frame seemed impossibly fragile, its fur ruffled by the turbulence of the cars speeding past. It didn't dare move, its instincts telling it to stay still, to shrink into the asphalt and become invisible. The man could see its tiny chest rising and falling rapidly, its fear palpable even from a distance. He raised his hand slightly, a calming gesture, though he wasn't sure if it was meant for the puppy or himself. "It's okay," he murmured, though his words were swallowed by the roar of the highway. The puppy's wide, glassy eyes flicked toward him for a brief moment, a mixture of hope and terror reflecting in their depths. Another car whooshed by, its tires skimming dangerously close to the edge of the lane. The man flinched but kept moving, his body angled slightly to shield the puppy from the full force of the rushing air. His legs felt heavy, his every movement deliberate and cautious. He knew that one misstep could send him or the puppy into the path of a vehicle. The honking of horns echoed around him, some drivers signaling their annoyance, others perhaps warning him to get off the road. The man didn't care. The sounds melted into the background, his focus narrowing entirely on the trembling puppy. Now only a few feet separated them. He crouched slightly, lowering himself to make his presence less intimidating. The puppy's ears twitched, its head tilting ever so slightly as it regarded him with wary curiosity. He extended one hand, palm up, his fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "It's okay, little one," he whispered again, his voice soft and soothing, though he knew the puppy couldn't hear it clearly over the roar of the traffic. Still, he hoped the tone, the calmness of his movements, would reach the terrified animal. The man took another step forward, his hand inching closer. He could feel the heat of the asphalt radiating through his shoes, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Every passing car felt like a reminder of how quickly things could go wrong. But he couldn't stop now. The puppy's life depended on him. The man could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he inched closer to the puppy, the chaos of the highway swirling around him like a storm. The roar of engines and the whoosh of passing cars were deafening, each vehicle a reminder of the danger he faced with every step. He was fully exposed now, standing on the edge of the lane, the urgency of the moment eclipsing all thoughts of his own safety. The puppy remained frozen, its small body pressed flat against the scorching asphalt. Its wide eyes flicked between the man and the rushing cars, its panic rendering it immobile. Each time a vehicle roared past, the tiny creature flinched, its ears flattening as if it hoped to disappear entirely. The man's pulse raced. He was so close now, but he couldn't afford a single mistake. A gust of wind from a passing truck tugged at his clothes, making him stagger slightly. His instincts screamed at him to retreat, to get off the road before it was too late. But then his eyes met the puppy's, and all thoughts of self-preservation vanished. With a deep breath, he took another step forward, his movements deliberate but swift. Time seemed to stretch as he extended his hand toward the puppy, trying to project calmness despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Just a little closer," he murmured under his breath, though the words were drowned out by the cacophony of the highway. His outstretched fingers trembled slightly as he crouched lower, his knees nearly brushing the ground. A sedan sped by just a few feet away, its tires kicking up a spray of gravel that stung the man's exposed arms. He barely flinched, his focus locked entirely on the small creature before him. He could see the way the puppy's tiny chest heaved with rapid, shallow breaths, its fear as tangible as the heat radiating from the pavement. Finally, he was close enough to touch the puppy. But the moment his hand brushed its soft fur, the animal recoiled with a sharp yelp, its body tensing as if preparing to bolt. No, it's okay," the man said, his voice low and soothing. He stayed perfectly still, his hand hovering just above the puppy's head. He couldn't let it run, not here, not now. He knew that if it darted into the flow of traffic, there would be no saving it. Summoning every ounce of patience, he waited. The seconds dragged on, each one filled with the thunderous noise of cars and trucks barreling past. Slowly, the puppy's breathing began to steady. Its trembling subsided just enough for the man to try again. This time, when he reached out, he moved even more gently, his fingers brushing the fur along the puppy's back. It didn't flinch. Encouraged, he slid his hand underneath its fragile body, feeling its ribs shift under his palm. The puppy was so small, so impossibly light, that it almost felt like he was holding air. But there was no time to savor the moment. As soon as he had the puppy securely in his arms, a blaring horn jolted him back to reality. A truck was barreling down the lane, far too close for comfort. The man didn't think, he just moved. Clutching the puppy tightly against his chest, he darted back toward the shoulder, his legs pumping with a desperation he hadn't felt before. The truck roared past mere seconds later, its horn still echoing in his ears. Breathing heavily, the man collapsed onto the safety of the gravel shoulder, the puppy cradled in his arms. Its small body was still trembling, but it was alive, its wide eyes now fixed on him with a mix of fear and trust. For a moment, neither of them moved, the chaos of the highway fading into the background. The man let out a shaky breath, his hands tightening protectively around the fragile life he had just saved. It felt like a miracle, an impossible rescue in the face of overwhelming odds. And yet, as he looked down at the puppy nestled in his arms, he knew he would do it all over again if he had to. The man sat on the gravel shoulder, his chest rising and falling with deep, uneven breaths. His arms cradled the trembling puppy, its tiny body pressed against his chest. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The roar of the highway faded into a distant hum, the rush of adrenaline giving way to a strange, heavy silence. He glanced down at the little creature in his arms. The puppy's fur was matted with dirt, and its wide eyes, still glossy with fear, looked up at him as if trying to make sense of what had just happened. Its tiny ribs expanded with each rapid breath, but slowly, the trembling began to subside. The man stroked its back gently, his fingers brushing over its fragile frame. "You're okay now," he whispered, his voice soft and low. He wasn't sure if the puppy understood, but the sound seemed to calm them both. Behind him, cars continued to speed by, indifferent to the life that had just been saved. A few drivers honked, perhaps in frustration at the car parked hazardously on the side of the road, but the man didn't care. All that mattered was the small, warm bundle in his arms, a life that had been seconds away from being extinguished. He leaned back slightly, allowing himself to take in the magnitude of what had just happened. The decision to step onto a busy highway, to risk everything for this tiny, helpless creature, it had all been instinct, driven by a force he couldn't explain. And now, sitting there with the puppy in his arms, he felt an overwhelming sense of relief mingled with awe. The puppy let out a soft whimper, breaking the stillness. It shifted slightly, nestling closer to him, as if seeking protection. The man smiled faintly, his fingers continuing to stroke its fur. He could feel the life in it, the rapid heartbeat, the warmth of its small body, and the weight of what he had done settled more deeply in his chest. For the first time, he allowed himself to look back at the road. The stretch of asphalt seemed endless, a blur of motion and danger. It was hard to believe he had just been out there, weaving between cars, risking his own life for a creature most people wouldn't have noticed. The memory of it was sharp and vivid, the blaring horns, the rush of wind from passing vehicles, the split-second decisions that could have gone so differently. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was that the puppy was alive, safe in his arms, and no longer alone. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a reminder. The man's mind raced with thoughts of how fragile life could be, how quickly everything could change. It was such a small act in the grand scheme of things, saving one puppy on one stretch of highway. And yet, it felt monumental. Because it wasn't just about the puppy, it was about what it meant to care, to act, to risk everything for something that truly mattered. As he sat there, the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting a warm, golden light over the road. The puppy shifted again, this time lifting its tiny head to nuzzle against his chest. It was a small gesture, but it filled the man with a quiet sense of fulfillment. He knew he would carry this moment with him for the rest of his life. It wasn't just a memory of bravery, it was a testament to the power of human determination and compassion. The world could be chaotic and indifferent, but in that chaos, there was still room for kindness, for courage, for hope. Eventually, he stood, the puppy still cradled carefully in his arms. The road stretched out before him, the cars still rushing by, but the danger was behind them now. The man glanced down at the small life he had saved, his heart swelling with gratitude. "Let's get you somewhere safe," he said softly, his voice steady now. He turned toward his car, ready to begin the next chapter of their shared story. The image of the man holding the rescued puppy stayed in the minds of everyone who witnessed it, and for good reason. This wasn't just a tale of bravery or quick thinking, it was a story that revealed something deeper about the human spirit. It was a moment that challenged the way people think about risk, responsibility, and the power of a single decision. Most people driving down that highway that day likely wouldn't have stopped. They had places to be, schedules to keep, and, perhaps, an unspoken belief that someone else would step in. The thought of pulling over, stepping into the chaotic flow of traffic, and risking their own safety would seem irrational, dangerous, even foolish. Why risk so much for something so small? But that's exactly what made the man's choice so extraordinary. He didn't stop to consider whether it was worth it in the eyes of others. He didn't weigh the opinions of strangers who might judge him for putting his life on the line for a puppy. In that moment, he saw a life in need of saving and acted with pure conviction, unclouded by doubt or societal expectations. His actions remind us of how often we are held back by fear, not just fear of danger, but fear of judgment. How many times have we hesitated to do the right thing because it felt inconvenient, risky, or because we worried about how others might perceive us? This man's story challenges those hesitations, showing that sometimes the most meaningful actions are the ones that defy logic or practicality. And yet, it wasn't just about bravery. It was about compassion. In a world that often feels indifferent, his choice was a powerful reminder that kindness and empathy still matter. The puppy was small, fragile, and unable to save itself. It didn't matter that it was just an animal or that the odds were stacked against its survival. What mattered was that someone cared enough to try. This story also challenges the prejudice many hold against stepping out of their comfort zones. We tell ourselves that some situations are not our problem or that it's better to avoid getting involved. But this man proved otherwise. His actions showed that even when the task seems impossible, even when the risks feel overwhelming, choosing to act can change everything, not just for those we help, but for ourselves. The memory of his choice stays with us because it's more than a rescue story. It's a mirror, reflecting the potential for courage and kindness that exists within all of us. It reminds us that every decision we make has the power to shape the world, even in small, quiet ways. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the choices we all face, then consider sharing it with others. Let's spread the message that compassion and action, no matter how small, can make a difference. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us of what it means to be human. Together, we can keep telling these important tales.